Hi, my name is Brandon and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today is part 2 of a discussion about gratitude based off of some of the things said in the book Living Sober, put out by Alcoholics Anonymous World Services. And as I mentioned yesterday, gratitude plays a huge role in recovery for myself and many, many other people. It's an important distinction between the way that we think now in recovery and the way that we used to consider the world back when we were in our addictions. And today I want to expand on the ideas we talked about yesterday and get into some other ways that gratitude shows up in our lives. The first thing I wanted to do was talk about why gratitude is something we have to practice. And to do that, we need to look at what is the definition of the word practice. A lot of times when people think of the word practice, they think of this, what is typically the secondary definition of the word, and that is carry out or perform a particular activity, method, or custom habitually or regularly. But the first definition goes like this. Practice means to perform an activity or to exercise a skill repeatedly or regularly in order to improve or maintain one's proficiency. So practicing is something that you do to get better at something. You practice the piano so you can get better at it. In the same way, we practice gratitude so that we can get better at it. So I'm going to read an example from the book here and then talk about it for a second. The example they give is, if one of us wins only $500 in a sweepstakes that has a $50,000 top prize, the sensible mood is easy to pick out. It is not bitterness at losing the biggest pot, but gratitude that we won anything at all. We continually find opportunities to make similar considered choices, and our experience convinces us that feeling gratitude is far more wholesome and makes staying sober much easier. It will come as a pleasant surprise to discover that it is not difficult to develop the habit of gratitude if we just make some effort. Many of us were reluctant to try, but the results, we have to admit, did speak for themselves. So gratitude, if you're seeing these kinds of things and hearing these stories and the idea of being grateful for something rather than bitter at what you don't have, seems like, well, that seems like it's not always going to be easy to choose that feeling. You know, how do I choose the emotions that I'm going to have? That's why it's called practicing gratitude. It isn't easy. It's not something that comes naturally, especially for those of us who have been so negative and so selfish in our addictions. The act of practicing gratitude is not an easy thing to do, and it's something that we have to practice every day in order to become better at it, and in order for it to start to be the natural way we consider the world around us. So, you know, examples from just getting stuck in traffic, for example. Used to, I would sit in traffic and just think all sorts of negative thoughts about the people who were causing the delay in my life and who were keeping me from getting to where I needed to be on time. But who knows whether if the traffic had been on time, if everything had been running okay, maybe I would have gotten in some terrible car accident and it would have been a very bad situation. Who knows? I can just sit and find things in that moment to be grateful for, whether it's just being alive, whether it's having a second to roll down my window and listen to the birds outside, whether it's having a second more to listen to a good song on the radio. I can choose in that moment to be upset at the situation or to practice some gratitude and look for the things in that moment that I have to be grateful for even if it's just the sober breath I'm taking in that moment. So that's the idea of practicing gratitude. And the more we practice that, the more opportunities we get to exercise choice in our emotions in other situations. So I'm going to read another section from the book here about the kinds of situations we used to find ourselves in when we were drinking or using. Rifling back through the memories of our drinking past, some of us spot another manifestation of negativism. But it too is a type of behavior that many have learned to change, and the change in our actions has also brought better attitudes and an improvement in our feelings. For some reason, we spent a lot of time thinking or noting or talking about how wrong or mistaken so many other people persistently were. Whether they were wrong or not is irrelevant to the welcome change in our feelings now. For some, the change begins with a tentative willingness to wait and see, to accept for a moment the hypothesis that the other person just possibly might be right. Before rushing to judgment, we suspend our own argument, listen carefully, and watch for the outcome. This has been hands down one of the most important things that I have been trying to learn and working on practicing throughout my recovery. Basically, when I was in my addiction, the moment you started talking, I started looking for ways that you were wrong about what you were saying or ways that I knew better than you. That was my default way of interacting with people and looking at the world. And that led to a lot of negativity on my part. It made it difficult for me to get along with other people and for other people to want to be around or talk to me. And that in turn made my life a very lonely place. What I have found in recovery is this idea of, before you react, consider that what the other person might be saying has merit and that there is something worth listening to in there. And on top of that, that maybe they know better than you in this situation. And instead of looking for the places where you can prove someone wrong, look for the places you can agree with them. Look for the places where they have something you can learn from. And all of a sudden, your conversations with people completely change. Your attitude towards people completely changes. You know, I went to a party last night. It was the first time I've been to a party in ages. And the first time I've really been to a party since I got completely sober over a year ago. And it was amazing. I spent time at this party talking to people and genuinely curious about their lives and what was happening and asking questions that engaged them. And I could see it on their faces that, you know, they were enjoying the conversation too. And it was a new experience for me because I never approached conversations with people like that in the past. In my addiction, I always approached conversations as an obligation and then spent time during those conversations looking for ways to look down on the other person, to feel like I was somehow doing something better than them or knew better than them about whatever we were talking about, or steering the conversation into a place where I could display some kind of expertise or talk about things I wanted to, instead of letting them have the opportunity to do that. And so I'm very grateful today for the chance that I got yesterday to practice some of these things and practice that choice of, instead of trying to prove people wrong, listening to them, taking in what they have to say, and just realizing that a lot of times in these conversations, nobody has to be right or wrong. All I have to do is have a conversation with another human being. Who's right or who's wrong, or whose opinion is really right or wrong, doesn't really matter. And at the end of the day, probably there's truth to both sides of any particular story. So the reason that I brought that up is that it just shows that we have a choice in many situations about how we're going to react to things. And that's a kind of a unique concept for those of us in addiction who just went with the flow and who let our impulses guide all of our behaviors. But we often have a choice, and we have to practice things like gratitude in order to strengthen our ability to make that choice in any given situation. So the last thing that the book says about this is staying sober can boil down to just such a choice, we have learned. We can spend hours thinking of reasons that we want or need or intend to take a drink. Or we can spend the same time listing reasons that drinking is not good for us and abstaining is more healthful, and listing things we can do instead of drinking. Each of us makes that choice in his or her own way. We are pleased when anyone chooses to make a decision like ours. But whether you're interested in AA or not, we offer good wishes to anyone starting out to stay sober in any way. We keep being grateful that we are free to do it in the ways described here. So gratitude, the power of choice, the power of exercising choice over our reactions, rather than reacting just mindlessly to the world around us, being able to choose the way we react. These are the gifts of sobriety, of recovery. These are the things that when we practice gratitude, we're building our abilities and strengthening our abilities to make these kinds of choices so that we can shape the perspective that we take on the world around us rather than letting alcohol or drugs do it for us. I'll be back tomorrow morning with more. In the meantime, I hope you have a great day today.